Hey everybody, it's Brian Asbury, and I just wanted to welcome you to today's episode. If you could, like today's episode, hit that subscribe button, and let's continue to grow the developmentally speaking brand.
Today, my guest is former NXT star Brian Breaker. Brian, how's it going?
Going good, man. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you. So, what made you want to get into professional wrestling?
Lifetime fan, I think that kind of goes with everybody. I found this stuff very young in my life, and it was just like, man, this is the coolest thing ever. But I mean, any lifetime fan probably can tell you, like when you're young, you have no idea how to break into pro wrestling. So, as I kind of got a little bit older, like the internet obviously became a thing, and you start seeing websites, wrestling schools, and things like that. So, started to realize like, oh, this is actually a thing I could possibly do. So that's kind of how once I realized it was a possibility, that's kind of when I started like, okay, I want to start hitting the gym, getting in shape, doing all that stuff to try to get myself ready for it.
At what point did you start to pursue this? Like,
Actually,
okay,
go
go
ahead. I'm
ahead.
sorry.
No, just saying, you made your mind up. This is what I'm going to
Yeah.
do.
'06 was when I first kind of started, and so I actually found a local wrestling school. I live in around the Tulsa, Oklahoma area. It was around this area, so I found a local school, and it wasn't really like what I needed. I needed like a legitimate school training every day. This was kind of a place at the time where like, hey, show up, set up the ring, and maybe you'll get 10 minutes in the ring. And
Hmm.
when you're young and new, you don't really understand like you're being taken advantage of as far as money and everything else. And so I started looking up wrestling schools close to like where I lived because I mean at the time Lance Storm had his school, but that's in
Hmm.
Canada, and I think Booker T's school was around. That's in Houston, which is not real close either. So I was kind of looking around, and I found Harley's school, which is in Missouri, which I'd been to Missouri as a kid, vacation there and stuff, so I know it wasn't as far. And Harley Race was obviously a well known name in the wrestling industry, so I called up his school, and they had a camp going in '06, so I attended that. Got to meet some of the Japanese guys. Simon Dean was there. Several other people involved in the wrestling industry,
Hmm.
and so I made my decision at that point. I'm going to save some money and move here, which I did in 2007.
How was training at Harley Race's school?
It was great. I'm so glad that's where I went because
Hmm.
being around Harley, I got a really good foundation for pro
Hmm.
wrestling, which I think is sometimes missing today a little bit. And so we definitely had like we didn't focus a lot on promos or storylines as much, but bell to bell, I think most everybody knew
Hmm.
that we could wrestle. So there was elements of it that I think like had I got a little bit more experience with promos and things like that, it would probably have been beneficial in some capacity. But I'm very happy that's where I chose to go because I did learn a lot as far as actually being a performer.
See, that's the problem in the area that I'm in. It's like, here's 2 weeks of training. Go out there. You're good to
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Let's get it. And it's like, no.
You need so much. I mean, like the thing is like if someone were to ask me like how much time training do you need to be a pro, it depends on the person, right? I mean,
Hmm.
it could be any number of things. It could be months, it could be weeks, and sometimes you are just thrown out there to see what you're able to pull off. But I think being at Harley's school, I learned like so much about just timing and
Hmm.
making sure that like I could work, without a game plan, which a lot of people can't do that nowadays, and that to me is a lost art. And I know there's that argument of like, oh, you should be able to put everything together too, and yes, you should be able to do both. But I think that's when you have someone who's very valuable is when they can do both,
Hmm.
in my opinion.
How long did you train at Harley's before you started doing matches?
About a year, a little less than a year. I moved there in August of 2007, and I had my first match in March of 2008.
So did you just stay in that area, or did you branch out and start doing the independents and?
I will see when I first moved to Harley School, we were doing shows all the time,
Hmm.
almost every weekend. So there really wasn't a need to branch out.
Hmm.
As my time there, started getting closer to the end, I realized like I needed to branch out a little bit more. I did a couple of local shows,
Hmm.
but not as much as I probably should have. And that's also one of those things too, where you don't realize that when you're new. Sometimes I probably should have tried to get up to Chicago to the Illinois area. Maybe I had a friend in Wisconsin. I probably could have worked there a little bit more. I didn't branch out as much as I should have. But again, that's one of those things you start to realize later on that you probably should have done that, but you didn't.
How long did you work the independents before you started doing dark matches or getting in touch with WWE?
So I did my first dark match in 2010. So a couple of years, I guess.
Hmm.
And I wrestled Vladimir Kozlov before Monday Night Raw. It was supposed to be a tag match, actually. It was going to be me and another extra against Vladimir and Santino, which was right before they became a tag team.
Hmm.
And so they squashed that. I can't remember why, but they wanted Vladimir to work as a babyface, which was weird, because he had always been a heel. And so
Hmm.
he's coming out smiling and trying to be a babyface. And I don't think the fans really knew what was going on. But, it was a couple of minutes. It was nothing spectacular. And, it was what it was. I didn't really get a ton of feedback on it.
Hmm.
I ended up coming back about a year later, maybe about a year and a half later, and I got asked to work Brodus Clay on Superstars. And this was before he became the Funkasaurus. This was when
Hmm.
they were trying to push him as like this monster heel, and which was awesome. And I'm 6'3", so there was a lot of times I got passed over for matches because of my height.
Hmm.
Um, I told the story the other day to someone. I almost got a match with the Boogeyman, but they realized I was a little bit taller, so they're like, "Hey, we're gonna go with this guy." I was like, "Well, I didn't really want the worms anyway, so maybe that was good for the best." But yeah, so I ended up having the Brodus Clay match. William Regal was there. He took note of me, and that's really when I became like on the radar. I felt
Hmm.
like because he really gave me. He was very complimentary of what I did. He was the one that pushed me to have the match. He was happy with it, and then that kind of got me on track to getting noticed by the WWE at that point.
How long after that did your developmental deal come about?
So that was in September of 2011,
Hmm.
and I think in the fall, like October, November, somewhere in there, we had another camp for Harley. And at this point, I'd been there a few years, so I'm kind of helping run things. And
Hmm.
Regal and Ricky Steamboat were there as guests from the WWE, and they both kind of took time to talk to me about like, hey, is this something you'd want to do? And I was like, oh, absolutely, that's definitely a goal. And we ended up kind of Regal kind of told me without, and he was pretty careful about not saying this is official, but just hey, stay by the phone, you'll hear something soon. And I was like,
Hmm.
oh, okay, cool. I didn't know, is that a tryout? Is that a contract? I didn't really know. Don't hear anything. And, when you're waiting on a phone call like that, it's a very nerve wracking phone call, obviously. So I didn't hear anything for a while. I'm like, okay, well, is this happening? And then, it's like November. So now we're into Thanksgiving. December, we're into Christmas. I'm like, well, okay, probably not going to hear anything. January rolls around, and they are in St. Louis for the Royal Rumble of 2012. So I went to that as an extra, and Regal comes up to me and asks how I was doing. I'm doing well. And he goes, "How was Florida?" And I was like, "I haven't gone yet." And he looks at me kind of like, "What?" He's like, "Hang on a second." He goes, and I don't see him for a while. And we talked later in the evening. He's like, "Well, you were supposed to go, and that didn't get put through, but I'll make sure that that never happens again." I was like, "Okay." And he goes, "You'll hear something soon." And at that point, I knew like I was on his radar, and
Hmm.
he was pitching for me. So when we got to work in the ring that weekend, I tried my best because we did the Royal Rumble, then the Raw and SmackDown that followed. So I did my best to show that I had even gotten better than the last time he had seen
Hmm.
me. And so he was happy with what I did. There was another guy there that happened to be an extra that had one of the worst matches I've ever seen. And that happens sometimes when you get nervous where like it was like literally they both are going for the drop kick, but it's not like the spot where that happens. It's they're both trying to do it. There's a double tackle, they both take a bump, just stuff that's just embarrassing.
Hmm.
So Regal stops the match, afraid one of them's going to get hurt. He asked me, he goes, "Can you work with him?" I was like, "Yeah, that's fine. I can work with this guy." And I just knew at that point I'm going to keep this simple and not let him hurt
Hmm.
me or himself. And we got through a pretty decent match, what I thought. So I felt like that put a stamp of approval on me that at least I could work with guys who were having issues. And so when he told me again, like, yeah, you'll hear something very soon. And a few months later, I got a call right before WrestleMania 28 that I was offered a deal.
Now, was this during Ty Bailey's time? Because other people I've interviewed, they're just like they reach out and Ty's like, "Oh yeah, I forgot to call you." I'm like, "What the hell does that mean?"
So I can't remember. I think Ty Bailey was gone.
Hmm.
I actually got my call from John Laurinaitis, so I don't remember if Ty Bailey was still there or not. So I mean, we'll probably get to the end of my developmental run in this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
but I think a lot of this was there was a lot of ongoing changes
Mm-hmm.
happening. So this is 2012, and I got the call from John Laurinaitis. John Laurinaitis actually executed my contract, so he was my main point of contact. Shortly after I had signed the deal and everything was good, I got a call from Canyon Seaman,
Mm-hmm.
and he asked me, "Hey, is everything good? Are you good with everything?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm great." He's like, "Well, call me if you have any questions." I was like, "Okay." And I didn't take advantage of that. I found out later a lot of guys did call
Mm-hmm.
him a lot, and I just was kind of like, "Oh, no, I'll unless there's an actual problem, I think I can handle it myself." So no, I think Ty Bailey was already gone by that
Mm-hmm.
point. But I have heard many stories. He came to one of Harley's camps as well, and yeah, I've heard a lot of that. So didn't have a lot of interaction with him
No.
personally, but I definitely have heard stories.
Now, when you got signed, was NXT a thing or was it still FCW?
It was just
Or-
starting, so they
Okay.
they had done one taping, I believe, maybe two, but one of them was like a dark taping where they just wanted to see how it looked.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they taped it, but they didn't actually air it. And then they did one actual taping, and then my first time there, Triple H actually pulls out the NXT title, the tag titles, and the women's title, which that told me right away. I was like, oh, this is a thing now, which is
Yeah.
really cool. And I was there when I was in charge of not in charge. I was a part of the ring crew when they started doing the black canvas, and then they even tried a yellow canvas, which a lot of people don't know. It looked really bad on television, though, so they didn't do that. But yeah, I was there for like kind of the beginning of that, which was really cool.
So how was the early days of your time in NXT?
There was good and bad for
Mm-hmm.
sure. Like I think a thing that didn't benefit me was coming from Harley's school. It was very kind of family ran,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone was kind of always together. Like we would go to a show, we would all meet at a location and kind of carpool. It wasn't like that in the Florida territory, FCW or NXT. It was very like everyone was very individual,
Mm-hmm.
and you had like a group of people you were friends with, but everyone else was just an acquaintance. And I'd always heard that in wrestling, but that was kind of a culture shock for me personally.
So how would you rate your run overall? Like, was there any moments that particularly stand out? How the training, the shows, the traveling?
It was one of those things where the NXT system was very hard to navigate because there
Mm-hmm.
were so many people, and I felt as though I was starting to gain traction because at least in my opinion, and this is what a lot of the people told me, like if got if one of the people in charge became a fan of yours, then you usually got pushed decently.
Mm-hmm.
I finally developed that with Ricky Steamboat, which I felt was like a pretty good guy to have in your corner.
Yeah.
He talked to me. He was high on my work, and requested I be in his classes at times and stuff. So I was like, okay, this is going good. And then out of nowhere, Ricky Steamboat is let go from that position. So now it's like, and we're back to square one. And so a lot of NXT to me was treading water and
Mm-hmm.
trying to keep your head above water and trying to you know, show that you're improving in the ring, show that you have a character, and coming up with something that they liked or they felt like they could use. And it was not easy, man. I
Mm-hmm.
will be honest that it was not easy to try to always be on in
Mm-hmm.
that system. So I've heard it's a lot better now. Again, I don't know because I haven't been down there in so long, but I've heard it's a lot different now.
Do you think that during that time it was just it's something that was new and they just had too many people at once and they're trying to people got lost in the shuffle, so
Oh yeah,
like treading on, yeah.
oh yeah, and it would be I think a thing where you're going to have X number of people there at
Mm-hmm.
all times. And that was another thing that I realized was when I came in, there was like 6 or 7 of us that came in at the same time. And it wasn't like, "Hey, welcome aboard, open
Mm-hmm.
arms." It was kind of like, "Who are these guys?" It was not like that at all, which was kind of like, "Oh boy,"
Mm-hmm.
because they looked at people, "Hey, these guys are looking to take our spots."
Mm-hmm.
And then I started realizing that when like 10 new people would show up, like the month after me, like 10 people started, and then like every so often new people would show up all the time, and you start to realize like, oh, okay, that's how this is. And if you look at it today, like especially like if you're in the NXT system, past my point, like maybe 2014 or 15, think about a guy like Ricochet showing up, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's going right to the top, so now you're back to treading water.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of those guys that were in that system for years before really anything happened. So it could be frustrating for sure.
That's what Steve Kerr and I talked to him a little bit ago, and he was like, they were sending me models, they were sending me football players,
Mm-hmm.
they were sending me athletes. He's like, what do you want me to do with
Right.
all these people? And it was just, it reminded me of, so I'm from Southern Indiana, so I was around OVW a lot.
Sure.
And like that 2002 to 2005 time period, it was you had 1 week to get over, or they
Yeah.
released you. Like Brent Albright, gone. The Bashams. It was just like, nope, we've
Yeah.
got plenty of people. They never really truly stuck around to develop a person because they had so many people in
Yeah.
line. And I always felt like NXT when because they did sign a lot of people, and they probably
Yeah.
still do have a lot. It's got to be hard for them to even see what they have talent wise.
There's a there's a guy you should hit up and talk to. His name is Drew Donovan. I don't know if you've talked with him or
Mm-mm.
not yet. After we're done, I'll kind of give you his information because he's got a great story. He was a guy he had been there about a month when I got there. Me and him became pretty good buddies. Both had independent experience. He was trying harder than just about anybody. Like he was a guy that I saw like, okay, he's trying to make something for himself, but he wasn't looked upon as anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't either. So like, and I think he would tell you that too. Like he wasn't looked upon as like someone that they were gonna push, but he was trying to make something work for himself. And I remember we were at a training, and me and him joked about this last time we talked. We were at a training, and they were like, "See this guy right here? This guy wants it. This guy's showing us he wants it." The next day, he got released. I'm like, what? And like talking to him, he was like, hey man, it is what it is. And I'm like, but how does that happen? And that was kind of the first time I realized like sometimes it doesn't matter. Like either
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna make it or you're not. And then like you mentioned Steve Curran. I love Steve. He was awesome. I loved him down there because he was honest.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something you find a lot in the wrestling industry. But I remember Steve, talking to him and being like, hey, what do I need to do? And he'd be like, well, I think you just need matches. And I'm like, no, I agree, but how do I get booked more? Because it's hard to get anything going when you're booked sporadically, which most of us were. The
Mm-hmm.
vast majority were booked very sporadically. And so and again, one of the things they would do is they would talk about improvement. And so if you have a football player who has no wrestling background,
Mm-hmm.
he's only going to get better in that month or 2 months, right? Because he has nothing coming in. So if you've already been working, like if they're looking at, okay, you were here at this point and this point you're here, we don't see a difference. It's like, well, because you already kind of know, like, yeah, you could improve on maybe your physique or your microphone skills, but those might be a slower progression than someone who has no
Mm-hmm.
knowledge. So it was always kind of different, I guess.
During that time, were they still doing like the little house shows, or was it just Full Sail?
Oh no, we were doing house shows all the time. So we were still doing the Tampa arena. There just
Mm-hmm.
wasn't television anymore, and so we did that on Thursdays. And the only time we didn't do that is if we had a NXT taping, and then we would do usually Friday and Saturday every weekend, sometimes on Sunday. So we were doing a lot of house shows.
What led to your release? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't think I ever, like I said, Ricky Steamboat had gotten let go, and I felt my stock drifting downward. I knew it was coming, and I think a lot of people feel that way when your stock's kind of drifting downward. And I got the idea. I'm like, okay, they haven't used me in like a month or two. Like, I think this is probably the end of the line. And I think the day I got released, like 7 or 8 people did too. To me, it was always like I was saying before. I think they always wanted like 75 people
Mm-hmm.
in developmental, and that's usually the number they kept. And so new people would show up, so you kind of always knew like, well, someone's getting cut, and that always happened.
What are you up to today?
So I don't really wrestle anymore. I did a couple of tours of Japan
Mm-hmm.
following my NXT tenure. I I decided to kind of move away from wrestling probably around 2017 or so, 2018. I think I was just burnt out, man.
Mm-hmm.
I was physically tired. I was mentally drained from it, and it wasn't becoming fun anymore. And I kind of told myself like if I ever get to that point, I'm not going to do it. And I think the wrestling business is very interesting because we don't always have an exit plan, right? We
Mm-hmm.
just, hey, I want to get into it, but we don't know beyond that. Like, okay, well, how long do I do this for? So I kind of decided to get away. This day I do podcasts myself. I've done several different podcasts over the years. I still do a show right now called the TV Toycast because I'm a big action figure collector. I do a show called Breaker and Bane's Power Hour with my friend Bane, who's a musician. And I do another show with another pro wrestler called the Saturday Morning Rumble Wheel, where we kind of just discuss different nostalgia things that are fun from back in the day, including wrestling and stuff like
Hmm.
that. We actually have an episode coming up where we're going to tell backstage stories, which is pretty entertaining because we both, being an extra, you see a lot of different stuff.
Hmm.
And my friend Daniel Cross, who I'm on the show with, has a story where JBL was doing a promo with Josh Matthews. At the end of the promo, he slaps Josh Matthews, and he kept messing it up on purpose so he could keep slapping him. And like he said, you could like they literally had to switch positions so that because one side of his face was so red. So it's definitely a wild west back there at different times. But no, I enjoy doing podcasts. I still do a little wrestling training here locally from time to
Hmm.
time whenever I'm able to, and just trying to help out that younger generation.
Yeah, it's funny that you say it just wasn't fun anymore. Steve said that's why he left NXT is
Mm-hmm.
that drive, and then it wasn't. That was Triple H's vision. That wasn't Steve Kern.
Yeah.
And he said it wasn't fun for him anymore. And when it wasn't fun, then that's when he was going to stop doing it because he always felt like developmental talent wasn't meant to be showcased. They're there to be molded to teach them how to do it. And then the NXT system just automatically puts you on TV and,
Mm-hmm.
it's sink or swim. I didn't feel like you could really, you only get one first impression.
Well, and also too, like if you think about guys who've gotten over in this industry, a lot of them they weren't there initially. Like look at The Rock, look when he
Hmm.
debuted. Like it's they're doing a whole sitcom on that now because it
Hmm.
wasn't there. Same with Triple H, same with The Undertaker. A lot of these guys, Steve Austin, biggest names in the industry weren't where they needed to be when they debuted. That's part of the process of getting to watch them, right?
Hmm.
And so I think with NXT, the idea was we're developing them on television. When they go to Raw, they're ready, and that sounds good on paper, but I don't think that's very realistic either.
No, I don't believe so either. And I think that's probably why the turnover is so high.
Right?
They fill these people up, you're getting signed, and you get this good feeling, and then they just don't do. It's almost like a broken promise. I mean, you're there,
Yeah, yeah.
but you're not
And
getting what you thought out of it.
I know a lot of times they were told some guys like, hey, you may be let go in 3 months, and it's like, what can you really tell from someone in 90 days?
Hmm.
Like that's not very long to uproot your life. Sign a year or two lease on an apartment that you probably can't afford otherwise. So it's definitely a sacrifice to make it in this industry. And I think that's what I try to tell people too that I train and let them know like, hey, if that's what you want, it's possible, but it's not easy.
Hmm.
And some guys I talk to, they're like, hey, I just want to wrestle locally, and I'm like, you know what, that's cool too because not everyone's dream is the same.
No, and I agree. Where can people reach out to you at?
Oh, I'm still on all the social media. So at Brian Breaker ODR on Twitter or at Brian Breaker on Instagram. That's probably the best two places to find me.
And let me ask you one final question here. If you
Sure.
had any advice to give to anybody in getting into professional wrestling, what would it be?
Don't. No, I'm just kidding. I would say if you're going to get into pro wrestling, just know what you're getting into. It's not an easy life. It's not an easy job. It's not an easy career. William Regal said this to a bunch of us as extras, and it really stuck with me. He said, if you're getting into this industry to make money, there are a lot easier ways to make money.
Hmm.
And he's like, you might make a living, but if you're looking to get rich, may not happen. And that's pretty accurate. I would say if pro wrestling is something you want to be into or want to be involved with, know what it's going to entail.
Hmm.
Get yourself in shape. Be ready for it because it is a very, very difficult life.
I just want to say thank you for all that you've done for professional wrestling and what you continue to do. And thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, man, it was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you.